Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hacking the Hustle. This is your host, Benjamin Sklar, and I'm very excited to have a special guest here today, Jacob Worenklein. How are you doing, Jacob?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I really appreciate you hopping on the show today. So for those listening, I'm going to give a little background about Mr. Worenklein, Jacob. He is one of the world's most respected leaders in the power generation space. Over his career, he has been responsible for structuring and investing more than 100 billion in power and energy assets. And today, he is the CEO of the US Grid Company, which acquires and manages natural gas power plants in major cities around the world, focused on massive reductions in carbon. So he's a very respected and honorable man. I met him sitting next to him at synagogue in West Hampton Beach. So I asked him to be on the podcast and he said yes. And so here we are. Thank you, Jacob.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course. I'd like to start off with asking you about your background and how you got to where you are today.
Okay. So since we only have half an hour, I won't give you the detailed story, but I'll just tell you in brief summary. I started out as a kid growing up in a very poor family, son of immigrants, Holocaust survivors, concentration camp survivors, etc. And I basically was taught one thing, which was one primary thing, which is do the right thing, be good to people, be kind, make sure that everything you do leads to people trusting your word but take care of people and build trust and do the right thing, work hard, develop relationships, solve problems. You know, that's kind of theme of my upbringing and coming through school and college and law school and business school. And then going to work for a major law firm, which I did. I was at Milbank Tweed for 20 years. I started off as a first-year associate. The first day I got there, I did one thing in terms of taking the initiative. I heard that there was a partner who joined that day, the firm. His name was Bob Douglas. He was the secretary and counsel to Governor Rockefeller. The governor had announced that he was not going to run for re-election. And Bob Douglas came to the firm, which was the firm that represented the Rockefeller family and its interests, including the Chase Manhattan Bank. And so I got there that day and I heard that he was joining the firm. So I knocked on his door. I took the initiative and I basically said who I was. I said, I know who he is and I would love to work for him. So if he has any work for me to do, please call me. Even though I was assigned to bankruptcy, I said, don't hesitate to call me. I'll do my bankruptcy work and I'll do your work. I would love to work for you. Because I knew he would have having been this number 2 most important guy in New York State, that he would have interesting things happening. He said to me, thank you so much. He was so gracious. He said to me, thank you so much, but I just got here today. I don't have a client yet. So, but I really appreciate your saying that you'd be interested. So a week later, I knocked on his door again and I told him, just want to say hi and see how things are going. And he said, well, thanks so much. I still don't have a client, but I'll keep you in mind. A few weeks later, I did the same thing and the same story resulted. And I guess, I don't know how I had the nerve to do this, but anyway, I did it 3 times. He then called me and he said, I want you to know I've got a client and I could use your help. And the client is the 7 electric utility companies of New York State functioning as a consortium to build all future power plants jointly. I could use a lot of help. So I started working for him. And even though I was assigned to bankruptcy, I worked kind of in both areas. And it's turned out that I was then assigned permanently to him. And for the next 7 years, I basically represented the New York State electric companies. And that was the beginning of my career. I got involved in representing, I became head of Milbank's power and projects area and began representing all kinds of power, energy, infrastructure companies. And then I went on to become an investment banker at Lehman Brothers. I was global head of power and infrastructure and at Societe Generale. And then I started my own company, US Power Generating Company, which owned half of Boston's generating capacity and a quarter of New York's. And I just basically felt that there were just fundamental principles, a couple of simple things that characterized my career. Number 1, take the initiative. Number 2, be nice to people. Be nice to the secretary who will say nice things about you to their boss. Be nice to the receptionist. You know, people say, what is the most important thing when a person takes you out to dinner and interviews you for a job? What is that person most interested in? And you might think whatever you think. The answer that comes back is, how did you treat the waiter and the bus boy or girl who kind of came to your table to clear the table? That's what they're looking at. How do you treat people? So the notion of the developing relationships, taking care to be trusted, is so important because it comes back in 10,000 times more important than what you gave. And taking care of people, and forgive me for going on, I would just say to you,
No, please.
it is so extraordinary because people think in companies that if you as a CEO, as I was and am, if you do that, well, that's, what are you doing that? Your job is to be developing shareholder benefits, et cetera. And my feeling is when you do that and you watch out for your workers at your power plants and you take care of them, you come to their safety meetings and you worry about them. And when somebody has a baby prematurely in Omaha and the plant manager calls you and says, the babies were born, the twins were born 6 months premature, and he's coming back to work on Monday, but I really don't feel comfortable with that. And I say, tell him that we'll lend him as much vacation as he needs not to come back to New York until he comes back to New York with his wife and his babies ready to come home, and then he can come to work, and we'll lend him all his vacation time and not to think twice about it. Because obviously in a large company that works many power plants, we have people who are substituting for other people. So that was easy for me to do. Well, those kinds of things that we did spread like wildfire, and our hundreds of employees know this, and we take care of them. And in that respect, they then want to pay us back 10 times. And that was the secret. They could not stop thinking about, as we took care of our people in this way, all of our people, as we thought about them, we tried to encourage them. If they weren't performing up to snuff, we would get somebody to pull them aside and say, here's what you need to do, instead of firing them. So what we got back from them was our power plants had been out of service the year before we acquired them 8 to 10% of the time. There were boiler tube leaks and other things had to be fixed. A year later, after I became the CEO, they were out of service 1 to 2% of the time. That difference, they were out of service, that difference was tens of millions of dollars of additional revenues to us. And it cost us, I calculated, between $10,000 and $25,000 over the 6 years or so that I was the CEO of that company to do what gave us many tens of millions of dollars of revenues. It is nothing. All it is a mindset. And so I would basically say the notion of your people are your greatest asset. Take care and respect them. Now, obviously, I only had 200 people in New York that I was the CEO of. And General Electric and other such companies have hundreds of thousands of people. But you can also set the example by saying you take care of your direct reports and they take care of their direct reports. And that's the culture of the company. And that's what we expect. So that is, I think, in a nutshell, the greatest single message I can give to people, which is don't take too seriously the fact that that's soft and all that stuff that people might disparage you by saying it's not. It's hard, it's common sense. And you can understand why people would feel like they can't do enough to pay it back because they're surprised. They don't expect it. And so that's one thing. The other thing is building trust. You see a problem, you try to do the right thing, not worry so much about what does it do for you, just do the right thing. So I see a battle going on between the governor of New York State and the CEO of Entergy Corporation, where the CEO of Entergy said, we're losing money on the ownership of an operation of Fitzpatrick nuclear power plant in upstate New York. We're shutting it down. And the governor says, you're not shutting it down. It's too important. You can't shut it down. And this goes back on the front pages of the New York Times, back and forth. And I see this going on. I call up the chairman of Entergy who works for the governor and say, you don't have to do that. I'll set up a trust for the benefit of the people of New York. I'll do it pro bono. I won't charge you or anybody anything for this. I'll help you acquire the plant. I'll help you get the funding for it. You can own the plant through a trust for the benefit of the people of New York. You, the governor, will appoint the trustees and you'll be in charge and you can do what you want. And if they're losing money, it's not going to cost you much. And so the answer came back to me, well, thank you so much for recommending that and for offering to do it pro bono. But we actually don't want to do that in New York State. Why don't you buy this nuclear power plant with the blessings of the governor? So in the state of New York. So I then negotiated to buy the nuclear power plant with Entergy. And I negotiated to bring in Exelon as the operator and the lessee of in a lease structure. And at the last minute, Exelon said to me, we really like the idea of being your operator and lessee, but we'd rather be the owner. Would you mind selling it to us? And I hated the idea. I just hated it because I
Why?
really wanted to be the operator of this nuclear power plant. It would have been a great jumpstart for my business, right? And I really believed that this was a safe and good thing to do. But then I thought to myself, Exelon is the world's best operator of nuclear power plants, in my judgment. Exelon operates a bunch of nuclear power plants next door to this power plant. How can I say to Exelon, no, I'd rather be the owner, I'll be a good owner, when Exelon really says, I'd rather be the owner, and they're offering to pay me for the privilege of taking on the ownership as their advisor, and Entergy made me their advisor too, and I engineered the sale directly from Entergy to Exelon. But the point was that that trust that was created by my saying to the governor, this is the right thing to do, and I'll do it for you pro bono, because it'd be good for the people of New York, led him to come back to me and said, no, you do it. Because what they were trying to do is they were trying to shut down Indian Point, and it was not, the governor thought it was confusing for him to be shutting down Indian Point and taking over the ownership of another nuclear power plant at the same time. So my point is, this is just one example of just do the things that will build trust. Do it because it's the right thing to do. You'll be so surprised for the young people on this call who are thinking about the start of their career, et cetera, how it just comes back to help you. And one little example, and I'll shut up, is I basically decided when we owned a Gowanus power plant in Gowanus, Brooklyn, New York, in Sunset Park, New York. We owned a power plant in the heart of Sunset Park on the Gowanus Expressway. And I decided that that power plant should be upgraded. We should have a much more efficient power plant. We could build a new power plant that would emit far less solid particles. At that time, we weren't as concerned about the greenhouse gases, although it would have much lower greenhouse gas emissions as well. It'd be much more efficient. We could build that. And I then went to talk to the environmental groups, the public officials, et cetera. And I said, and I went to the hospital to find out about asthma rates, because I heard that there were many people, there was a high asthma rate in Gowanus, off the Gowanus Expressway and the Gowanus near site. I tried to learn about the health issues. And then I came to talk to everybody, and I told them, we will commit ourselves to emit less and to pollute less and to have less, and to be a better citizen. And would you support us? Because we needed a permit to do that. And we got unanimous support from the environmental, community, public official groups, and Mayor Bloomberg, at the time, Mayor of New York. Today, that's unthinkable because nobody will support that. But this was 13 years ago or so that we did this. It was the only power plant that was kind of approved with permitting and no opposition. So my thinking about it is when you really work to try to gain the trust of people and they think you're really sincere about what you're going to do, enormous things happen that are very unexpected. And that's my primary message. Care and respect for people, build trust, take the initiative. Don't think that because something's been handed to you as an assignment, that's all you have to do. Reach out to people. And then I would say my last point in terms of my main highlights, develop relationships. When somebody comes to you, you're a lawyer, you have a client, the client is a junior officer, you're a young lawyer in a law firm. My point is, get to know that person. That person is not merely giving you a problem to solve that's legally. That person is a person with human issues, worried about something, wanting to be successful. Get to know what his or her objectives are, and see how can you help them be successful. Get to know who they are. And they'll tell you things that will surprise you. And then they'll call you on the next matter. And they'll want to develop that relationship because you care about their success. So that is the mindset that I think is, to me, the great gift that I was given at the start of my career, maybe because of the way my mother brought me up. It's so funny where you get these things, you kind of get them when you're a child. You're taught in kindergarten to hold the hands of your classmate when you're crossing the street, and you try to apply that in life. But that's the main messages that I would like to get across.
Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all of those. The last one really hit me because as a first-year associate now at a law firm, thinking about my superiors as individuals really changes my perspective in regards to how I should approach them and how I could open myself as a human being and be empathetic and change the relationship for the better. So I appreciate that. I want to change topics and ask you about what you're working on today and what are your current goals as the CEO of an energy company?
Sure. So My mission is to do the following: to identify and to try to cultivate and develop major technologies that will be critical towards the reduction of carbon in the country, and will also be reliable, so that in major hurricanes, et cetera, the power plants will continue to operate, unlike the disasters we saw in Texas and California in the past year or so. And so my thought is I'm trying to learn battery storage technologies, what is really effective, does not need manganese, cobalt, nickel, et cetera, the very hard substances that are very expensive. What does not create dendrites, which create fires on batteries, so we can't put them in or near buildings. So we can't have the type of distributed energy throughout communities that we need. So develop the technologies, commercialize the technologies, be an innovation center in the heart of the city, so that on our site, we will apply, demonstrate, cultivate, develop relationships with the universities, et cetera, and develop the technologies that are critical in terms of energy storage, carbon reduction, carbon capture, potentially, and also the flowing of hydrogen into natural gas-fired power plants. We can take hydrogen, and 10 to 30% of an old power plant can be fueled by hydrogen, which is zero carbon producing, and therefore reducing significantly the carbon emissions. And so I'm looking for sites that do the two things, give me that platform, but also enable me to have the natural gas-fired power plants at the ready to power a city when the city in fact needs power, because there's not adequate renewables in place, perhaps because the sun hasn't been shining, the wind hasn't been blowing, et cetera, that we will always need some kind of reliable power plant structure. And so, for example, I was the chairman of Ravenswood, which is the largest for the last 3 years or so, until recently, largest power plant in New York City and in New York State, other than Niagara Falls. And that power plant during Hurricane Sandy in New York provided over 50% of New York City's power, a large natural gas-fired power plant. Today, because we have more renewables coming in, there is not the need for that much power to be emitted from that power plant, but it's on standby and it gets capacity payments for availability, first for being available. My thought is that my power plants will be primarily available on standby, ready to power the system, and the real business is going to be transitioning the power plants so that we don't need them in 10 years or 15 years or so, that we can get down to net zero carbon because the technologies that we will be demonstrating, plus the batteries that we'll be putting into place, plus the solar plants that or wind that we can put into place on excess land, will in fact provide the capacity that's needed. That's the vision that I have.
Wow, fascinating. What issues or challenges are you facing trying to accomplish all of that?
Well, the interesting thing is that in a lot of cities, a lot of environmental groups and governmental officials don't have the patience that I think the situation inherently requires. In other words, they would like to shut down. Some of the extreme groups who aren't as thoughtful as they should be would like to say, please shut down right now these power plants. We don't need them. We don't want them. They're carbon producing, et cetera. And of course, it's our dream to be able to ultimately shut down these plants because we have other technologies that will in fact give us reliable power. We don't have that today. So the challenge is to talk in a credible way, in an honest, open, candid way, one-on-one with some of these groups and individuals and say, we buy the story, we buy the pitch. It's just not timely. We can't do it today. You will kill the city. And in fact, the government officials know this. So, so what we see is really very silly things happening. For example, a company, if I came today to officials and said, I want to do what I did in Gowanus, which is I want to upgrade, improve, make more reliable, less carbon producing, putting in new technologies on the site. I need your permission. I need a permit. Will you please support me? The answer will probably be no. And that's because of fear about political backlash that comes from people who are not being thoughtful. The challenge is to be credible, to be trusted, for people to know you in fact intend to do everything that you and they want to do, but it can't be done yet. But on the other hand, we're going to be reducing the output of these power plants because we're going to have more and more renewables. The unbelievable situation is you cannot have 100% renewables on the system without these power plants on standby, ready to produce power. Because if you had a system with 100% renewables, you would be in blackout a number of times every year, and the city would be without power, which means that the ventilators in the hospitals would not work. The preemies who are getting the necessary treatment, etc., would not have power. When we had our Hurricane Sandy, we had blackouts, or the hurricanes with blackouts, we had nurses carrying down their preemies in the little baskets that they were in, down 25 flights of stairs because they were at risk. So my point is to develop trust and an honest, open relationship which says we're on the same book, we're on the same page, but allow us to keep these plants in place, to improve them so there's less carbon. Don't think that we can shut them down. Let's work together as rapid a time frame as possible. So that's the nutshell of the challenge, which is the tyranny of what people think is immediately urgent right now, as opposed to what is practical in the real world and taking into account everybody's collective interests for a safe and reliable and growing healthy city.
How can I and the people listening help you?
Just keep in mind that when you hear extreme advocates of shut it down now, no power plants operating now, that's not realistic, that we share the objective, but the timing has to be right and the technology has to be developed, which is why I'm so eager to help develop that technology and to demonstrate it on these sites.
Understood. All right, so for my last question, which is my signature question I ask everybody, is if there was one thing you could do to improve this world, what would you do and why?
I'll tell you, that is such an extraordinary question. And I think that really is, if I can give you two things. Number one, we in the wealthiest countries of the world must do more to alleviate poverty in the poorest countries of the world, because we're not on this earth alone, and we weren't put on this earth for our own self-enhancement. So number one, let's be advocates for the fact that even with all the problems we have in the United States and in other major developed countries, we are living in nirvana compared to so many people in the world who are struggling. Provide political support for more foreign aid, for more health aid, etc., for more vaccines to being developed and shared with these other countries, point number one. Point number two, in the United States, let's figure out ways to enhance trust so that while we all feel like we want to take care of our families, etc., the divisiveness that has arisen is just so damaging. And what we have to do is to figure out how can we, in fact, develop a country which takes care of all of us, that our mission is a creation of a better world for all people, for all Americans, and let's thrive together in America. And that's an issue of toning down our rhetoric, our political rhetoric. Republicans hate Democrats. Democrats are hating Republicans. The most extreme segments of the Democratic Party hate the centrist and less liberal or extreme segments. And yet we're trying to do the same thing. Why can't we just get together and talk and try to create an environment where we can have policies that will help us thrive together in America? And that requires mutual respect, a dialogue and a language of respect, which kind of goes back to the earlier conversations I had. With respect, and when you talk to somebody who has a very different point of view, but with respect and not with antipathy and not with a feeling of disgust as you look at that person's face, things could happen. And that's, I think, what we have to do. So the two things are a better world through our sharing some of our wealth with other countries. And number two, a sense of tolerance for each other in this country so we can build and thrive together in America.
Thank you, Jacob. Very thought-provoking answers. I appreciate you coming on the show today. It's been an honor, true pleasure.
Thank you so very much for allowing me to be on this, to have this wonderful conversation with you.
Of course. Goodbye, Jacob.
Goodbye. Thank you.